Getúlio Vargas has not only observed history, we help write it. Our commitment is unique and non-negotiable: the development of Brazil and the Brazilian people. We are a global center of excellence. Here, education builds the paths to the future. From public administration to law, from economics to data science, from communication to applied mathematics, from social sciences to international relations. Our schools not only lead in the educational rankings, they redefine quality standards, an excellence that breaks borders. Present in more than 100 cities, we bring knowledge to more than 100,000 executive education students each year. But knowledge only has value when it becomes impact. We are a global think tank. Impact is producing indices that contribute to the country's economy. It is to train and select high-caliber professionals for the public service. It is to build solutions that bring basic sanitation to Brazilians. It is contributing to the education of more than 10 million students in public schools across Brazil. It is to apply artificial intelligence to analyze millions of genomic data points and strengthen the country's cyber defense as a strategic defense company. To lead the climate discussion, creating unprecedented risk management tools and emission inventories. It is to preserve our history and our heritage. Where there is a complex challenge, FGV is present. Research, consulting, technical advisory, large-scale competitions. The scale of our work reflects the size of our commitment. Far beyond education, far beyond research, far beyond the obvious. Fundação Getúlio Vargas, transforming knowledge into a legacy for Brazil.
Good afternoon, everyone. We reached the end of the closing ceremony of the 6th edition of the CPDP LatAm. My name is Nicolas Ingales. I'm professor here in FGV, and it is a pleasure to be the moderator along with my colleague Luca Belli. I'm here to invite our distinguished speakers. We have a list that I'm going to read. So whenever you hear your name, please come up to the stage. So we can start with the Minister Esther Dweck, Minister for Public Service Management and Development. Thank you. Good afternoon. The second one is Gustavo Parra, who is President of the Data Protection Institution of Mexico. A round of applause. And next we have Beatriz de Ancorena, that is the head of the Data Protection Authority of Argentina, and also president of the committee of the 108 Convention. We have also Ahmad Binder, director of Digital Intelligence of Digital Cooperation Organization. Welcome. Rodrigo Correia, Secretary for Transparency and Data Protection of the City of Rio de Janeiro. Welcome. Alessandro Lombardi, CEO of Elea Data Centers. Welcome. Pablo Bello, Head of Digital Transformation in CAF, Latin American Development Bank. And Carolina Botero, Regional Leader of TTG Forum. And lastly, my colleague and partner, Luca Belli, Professor of FGV. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your attention. Now let's start. Before we start, I would like to make a brief reflection about what we observed in the last few days. We had important discussions, and I would like to highlight a few points because after the opening ceremony, in which we discussed many challenges and solutions related to digital sovereignty, in the first panels, we had a debate of digital sovereignty, recognizing that the economic aspect is important and there are so much more involved. Digital sovereignty is also about the capacity to understand the functioning of digital technology, develop it, and regulate it according to its values, as we wrote in some books that were circulated here that my colleague Luca Belli is going to comment on. That way, with transparency, we have a cross-cutting discussion. And it is cross-cutting because it is applicable in different areas in terms of regulation, but also it operates in two different ways. In order to have an effective digital sovereignty, we need transparency not only of the operators, of data treatment, the platforms, but also the transparency of the government and the regulators and the judiciary powers on how these technologies are being regulated. This is a critical discussion not only for digital sovereignty, but also to enable trust, international trade, and cooperation among the countries. This goes, for example, against the trends of some trade agreements that we have observed to insert dispositions that prevent the access to the source codes of the technologies and the algorithms, including by governments or limited access, especially for public procurement and national security interests and protection of human life or human health. Apparently, these exceptions would not be applicable to economic interest cases as the necessity to create a more competitive market. And this is bad because transparency is paramount to create a working market. And it's important to highlight another point of sovereignty that we discussed in the first day in one of the first panels, that is equity. Equity corrects the asymmetries in the value appropriation that is created in the digital ecosystem. And we already discussed the concept of data equity. How can we make sure the system would give back to those who are creating the value in the digital system? If we focus on the most efficient or who has the first access to data, we would feed a system that is not comprehensive, it's not inclusive. And this is a lesson that we learned with financial regulation, the crisis that we had in financial regulation, and many scandals that we had in the context of technology. And here, I would like to close with a question and a provocation that it is an appetizer for our plenary discussion, that the digital public infrastructure, this topic that it has been discussed throughout the conference, can be used as an instrument to level the conditions of competition and prevent the emergence of problems of economic justice. We heard today the director of central bank, one of the directors of central bank, explaining how important it was for the PIX payment system to coordinate the market players with a public infrastructure, that it wouldn't happen if we depended on a joint of forces of the private sector. And that allowed Brazil to be successful in bringing people inside the banking system and to create financial education. But the fact is that this instrument is perfectly legitimate of digital sovereignty. Remember that I said that regulator, we have to understand the technology according to its values. The fact that it is being challenged as a discrimination measure by the United States nowadays, it means that we are far from reaching this concept of cooperative digital sovereignty that we want to advance in the discussions. And I want to highlight the role of civil society and the academic sector to fight this attempt, the public citizen published a detailed explanation explaining why this attitude is wrong. But the main point is we need to create a language that can build bridges between different players and prevent these attempts to use a neoliberal ideology against the legitimate adoption of public infrastructure towards the interest of the population. We can question how the infrastructure is conceived, is maintained as public, but we need to be able to speak the same language. So here, just to close, I had three slides that I wanted to show of our work. I don't know if you can see. Oh, it's here. We need to build bridges to understand that the ex-ante regulation of digital platforms is a maturing of the antitrust law that is not a discrimination measure to apply the laws, especially from United States. And in second place, these are the other work. We need to explain the dynamics of our context to understand the transparency of the regulatory action to avoid these measures to be used to establish a commercial war. I hope that today's discussions would clarify these points, and I'm sure that it will be enriching. Having said that, I'll give the floor to my colleague, and right after we will open the discussion with Esther Dweck's presentation. Thank you, Nicolo. I'm just going to take 2 minutes before the minister speaks. I just want to remind some points that are important to understand this composition of the table here. The definition that we already started the event yesterday about digital sovereignty as the capacity to understand how the technology works to develop alternatives and regulate them effectively. These digital technological systems, these AI systems, to reach the self-determination and control over the technology and not being controlled by the technology. It seems that it's very easy when we say it, but this is extremely complex for a simple reason. The digital systems, the AI systems, are not monolithic. These are systems. We call it systems because they are systems. They are a collection of elements. And it is extremely important to understand this complexity, to understand the other elements of these systems in order to see in which kind of layer there are vulnerabilities, in which one of them we have an asset, in which layer we can stimulate cooperation and openness through regulation, for example, the interoperability, or through the adoption of open technologies. In this book, I want to publicly thank Minister Esther. She met me last week when we were starting this research. The talk that we had was extremely important to continue to develop this study and to consolidate many dimensions because of the multi-dimension characteristics of this topic. In the next slide, I would like to highlight the evolution in the last year about this research of cooperative digital sovereignty that was drafted by DCO, the Digital Cooperation Organization, with my friend Ahmed here, to highlight the necessity of cooperation. The other facilitators that can be basically categorized in four main categories: the digital assets, data and models, the infrastructural models of the semiconductors conductors to data centers, connectivity, electricity, and the mineral resources, and even the elements of capacity, the people who are qualified, the research centers. And one point that I would like to thank Ahmad's contribution in the evolution of the thoughts, the access to capital. Nowadays, trillionaire companies as OpenAI, Anthropic, and SpaceX, maybe they are more digitally sovereign than some states because they have access to trillions. And this is an important element that to consider the digital sovereignty. And then the elements of security, the frameworks that the AI safety or the damages that the system can cause to the user, or security that is really neglected in the discussion as cybersecurity, how the system can be manipulated. And all of these elements need to be considered in a joint way. And it is then the cooperation is even necessary. One point that I would like to highlight to start this conversation is to understand why all of these people who work with different institutions who have different focus, all of them are complementary. Because only by understanding this complexity, we can understand where the cooperation is not only possible, but it's necessary. Where the openness is not only possible, it is essential as a condition for sovereignty. And once again, I want to thank Minister Esther Dweck for the leadership that she is performing in this topic, not only in the national level. I'm traveling around the world. I went to China and I knew that you were internationally recognized for your role. So it's an honor to count on your presence here. Please, as we say in good Portuguese, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Luca Nicolo. It is a pleasure to be here. As a minister, I have been here for a few times in events that we have organized as well. And once we have already discussed the states of the future and this topic about digital, it is extremely necessary for the present, but mostly for the future. And basically, I would like to present to you what Brazil has been doing, focusing on data governance, international cooperation, and digital sovereignty in a broader way. That is a topic that ever since I started working in the ministry, it was a very dear topic to us. And this topic has grown with the geopolitical tensions. And so it became a key point in our government. So very briefly, I'd like to give you some numbers. And I'm going to be brief because I want to have a very enriching roundtable with my colleagues. Just a brief idea. So the digital references in Brazil is huge. We have different branches that participate digitally. We now have a program for digital transformation. And obviously, this is a topic that passes by every ministry. But our ministry, because of the digital government, the federal government is trying to become more and more digital. So we tend to focus more on it. And we have this important number that Brazil had a 16th position and is now 10th position, evaluated by OECD. And I know that it seems like it's not that way, but the platform gov.br, we already have about 78 million official users. And we now have this new service that we're providing for signing documents in the platform, and that is a huge success. And we're basically trying to understand what would be this digital government. And we have been trying to apply universal concepts here in terms of providing access to everyone. And we do have issues with that across some states. Unfortunately, we're a country that has huge numbers for digital exclusion. But sovereignty is something that we've always discussed, and we use your own concept of digital sovereignty. It's not about being self-sufficient, because we do not have the capacity for that. And so the ideas that you're bringing up about shared sovereignty is a great thing. And I believe that only a few countries would not participate, like China and the US, but in some small way, perhaps internally there is an internal cooperation. So our idea is that we want to be leaders in digital transformation, but with safe and sovereign data, but with a clear goal to help the population get access to public services. This is something we must always remember, to offer our population the best services possible. And we have been working with 3 main groups. One of them is identification. This process of actually getting to every one of our citizens is something that we have been working very hard on. And just like I said, we have 178 million citizens with official ID, but still that we still have millions of people that do not have access to that. And this is an ID that can be both in paper and digital. And we're also working with the biometry database. We also have the fiscal ID as well. That will be the only number for every citizen, for every public service. And that was something that before was not possible. For the integration of database, even for health purposes, our healthcare system, we would have a specific number for that. And the same person could have more than one different registry number in our healthcare system, and that was very wrong. And we have been trying to instruct the population that this is something that's not only necessary for public security, but also for the access of services. And when you're getting to in a platform where you can find so many different services, that's very important. We've also been working with the infrastructure. We are constantly trying to bring our data to data centers in Brazil, in our public IT companies, but also in that integration of database that is a key point for our infrastructure, to know the data that we have and allow them to be interoperable. Our president calls the database of Brazil, and the portal of services that we have, that's the DPIs as well, that Brazil, ever since the G20 in 2023 in India, Brazil started using this logic of a public infrastructure to our own services. And we've been trying to transform our database and our digital assets, in some of them even public goods that are digital, that can be used in other countries perhaps. And this is something that we're working on so that the government can get closer to its citizens. We've been working with the automation of benefits, because people can have their own benefits being paid to them without even the need to actually request for it. And we're constantly trying to strengthen this federation integration, and we have great partnerships with the Secretariat of Administration from municipalities, just like the secretary here. But we're always focusing on innovation, and we're now discussing with the planning secretariat of the states some states deal with this, the Secretariat of Planning, and some use the Secretariat of Administration. So depending on these smaller municipalities, we recur to the states. So we have been establishing a good partnership with municipalities with over 500,000 people, and that will allow us to have a new logic to us in this new era, the post-digital era, and the government with this new digitization of data, and the public services are being offered digitally, excuse me, and we now offer over 12,000 public services through digital platforms, and we are now sort of migrating to this new technical term that is called governo agente, which is the government to each and everyone, not in an individual logic, but with the idea of knowing the need of each individual, of every person, what they need, what they can have access to. And for example, to identify municipalities where they have serious cases of malnutrition, or they don't have enough schools. And so that is a way that the government will be able to understand who needs help with what, whether it is even for health purposes or education, without that individual actually need to request for it. So that is something we've been working on very hard. And naturally, what we need for that, in order to have that, is data. And obviously, privacy is something that is obviously mandatory. And we do have the GDPL, and we have Argentina and Mexico here as well, and cybersecurity, and also the technological environment that we've been working on very hard. But we sort of missed other topics being discussed. So the quality of those data, we still have a lot of database that are very important, but sometimes the quality is not good enough. And for example, I have 40 different systems, and the information that are kept there, they're kept there in a way that I cannot use them. So if I don't transform those data into the same type of data, so then I can use them for different purposes, then they're not so useful. So we need to have good data quality of data for good decision making, and we are working on the reality of our country. And also, we do not some of the data that we have, we're not even aware of that. So AI is actually helping us with to get to know every kind of data that we have, and for that I need governance. And we did a public consultation, and it is about to become a federal normative. But that's important to help us understand how we're going to do that governance, because each public agency has to consider all of those elements when we're discussing data. And we have been working with that via the IPD, the Digital Public Infrastructure. That was something quite recent, actually. And I have here Rogério, he's the Secretariat for Digital Infrastructure of our government. And we have the safe and shared and interoperable systems. Not all of our databases are IPDs, and many of them do have the potential to become one. But just to give you a few examples, digital ID is already considered an IPD, and also biometry that is linked to that, to the platform of that's called connecta.br. And there we have also have data that are ready to be shared and used. And that was our main idea, actually. And the idea of proactivity, that people would not even need to click on something to request it. The digital payment method, that's PIX. We had also the new registry for rural areas and rural properties with DataPrev, so that we can transform it into an IPD. And during last COP, we have launched that to other countries that would like to use that same logic. And we have made good advancements on AI for the public sector. It's Project Inspire. It is a huge project funded by our Ministry of Science and Technology and Innovation. And we have over 200 researchers participating on the development of this project. And one of the products here is to have this huge chatbot for the government, but basically trained by specific data from each region, so that the access to GovBR would be possible for everyone. And as you can see, for us to train an AI, we have to have great quality data and very well organized data. And it's not just about education, but we need to be able to monitor students that are finishing high schools and going to college, for example. And the GovBR account, we did a pilot test of 160,000 conversations, and that went very well. But how do we do that with sovereignty? And using your definition, our president was discussing sovereignty in a broader way, and we did this in a moment where Brazil was being very pressured and questioned about that. But that's our concept of sovereignty, that we have to be able to decide about our own destiny and be able to define and regulate. And those points are very relevant to us. And we're working from 4 different dimensions of digital sovereignty. Data, that is basically the first stage, to be able to understand and use it the best way possible. We did this huge operation to bring those data from different clouds of the world to the cloud services here in Brazil. And this is something that we must have it done, so that we'll make sure to have access to those data whenever we need. And in case there's an interruption and for connection, we will be protected. And this was an important process for the degree of sovereignty when we were hiring cloud services from those big techs. And we were using that purchase power of our state to make sure that that technology transfer would be successful, and being able to operate and decide in that digital environment that we're using. And for example, the Microsoft services for the government, they would actually have to work inside of our cloud, and it's not enough, but it's something that we were able to adapt to be minimally protected. And so now we're discussing that interoperability. Because if that provider is interrupted, how can I switch it to a different provider without having any losses? And we obviously want to migrate to a different technology. In some areas, we already have our own development of technology. And I have to make sure that digital operations will be in accordance to our rules, and also based on those AI layers. We were trying to analyze how the situation of Brazil was.
Because we had this idea to think on how would be the new steps to increase our sovereignty, and we put this together based on a combination of different versions of these pilots of digital sovereignty in the strategic resources, in the physical infrastructure, in the applications, and the governance of all this. And we have been working on that. And something that everyone knows, that the domain is in some of these layers is a huge domain on a few companies, and this is well known by everyone that this increased the risk of low digital sovereignty. And we have seen this in the logic that this sovereignty will will never be self-sufficient in everything, and we don't want to do that. Maybe we would like to be that if we had a big stage of development, but this is not our intention. We don't think it will be the best way not to use technology and trying to reach a high level of sovereignty that would stop us from advancing. And we made a lot of corporations. The most recent one is in this picture. I can see Ambassador Eugenio, and he was here, and he was there with me. Brazil joined this World Organization of AI Cooperation. We have seen other groups of AI being formed in other places in the world, but this is based on our principle that is in these open systems and in a technological cooperation for a joint advancement. And we have a strong cooperation with India. We were invited to participate in this global digital collaboration that the Swiss government is proposing. They have a good, big concern to have sovereignty for digital assets. It is a logic that very similar to the beginning of the internet, to be something that is not dominated by one single country. Their concern is that most of the digital technologies are dominated by few countries and few companies that are subject to the jurisdiction of one single company that can prohibit access, and as we are unfortunately seeing. And they are worried about this. And the idea is to join governments, civil society organizations, and international organizations, UN forums that Brazil participates in here in Latin America, the ECLAC strategy. And this is our premises. Brazil cherishes balanced rules in the distribution of economic, technological, and scientific benefits, because every scientific technology and scientific benefits depends on a technology that is dominated by one company, but in fact, it wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the common knowledge base. And those who dominate the technology in the edge, in the end, we have to avoid this capture of wealth by few countries and by few companies. And the open patterns and digital public goods, the AI governance driven to the public interest and for the sustainable development. AI used to resolve the problems in the world and not for the war. And this is kind of utopic right now, but the idea of Brazil is the AI is not for the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons can serve for, AI can serve for many other things, but not for weapons. And the cooperation in scale with policies of productive integration. We need to cooperate digitally, but every country has the right to follow its own path. We of course, we have to respect the previous principle not to be of warfare. And in case of Latin America, that we have physical integration, we are working on the physical integration to use that for the digital integration as well. And this is an important work, and we have to think about a specific alliance with Africa. And Marilia was talking about this. I don't know if Marilia participated here. It was something that was really important because they are thinking about a specific thing for data. But I think there is a strategic alliance with Africa. There is a continent that if we in Latin America have problems, Africa has more than that, more than us. And the global south, we have to look at Africa. We have to look at those who are better than us, but also to those who are worse than us. This is the mapping that we made of the existing actions inside the government. We are not going to be able to see these letters, of course, but inside these layers, we mapped more than 50 actions that the government was doing in different departments, but without the complete coordination. Now we are integrating all this. And these last slides are the things that we are seeing in the future. And from this dialogue, of the idea of the strategic resources of the digital talents and all of the developing countries suffer with the brain drain because we graduate people, we train people, but we do not have the demands of high paid jobs and high technology jobs, and we lose our talents. And it's a problem of talent retention and training as well. And Brazil, because it is a country with critical minerals and abundant resources compared to other countries, we are preparing a specific strategy for that so our talents do not leave the country and our minerals are not extracted without any capacity to make it give a return to the country. In Latin America, it's an important area of cooperation because we have different minerals in different countries in Latin America. And this discussion of the states to use the purchase power, and we need to work on that. And we have clean energy. Brazil is one of the countries with the biggest highest clean energy, highest rates of clean energy in the world, and it wants to make these reach the digital services. In physical structure, we are in the process of acquisition of AI supercomputer, and we have a network of top performance ultra processing, and we don't have the capacity to store all the data that Brazil needs. The federal government doesn't have it. It is expanding. DataPrev is quadrupling the capacity of storage, but it's not enough, not even for all the Brazilian universities, especially for all the municipalities and the private sector as well. So there is a discussion to leverage this computational capacity in Brazil, and we are discussing on how we can have a Brazilian cloud service, not depending on the providers. And in the application, all these IPGs discussions that I brought, it is a big discussion of governance, both globally and domestic in the regulation. And we are advancing. This was a discussion that we had with the president this week of the specialized AI models. It's very unlikely for us to generate a big LLM or a big model to substitute the existing ones, but we have the capacity to come up with different specialized systems. This is another important area of South-South cooperation, that part of our problems are common, and we can have a big space for cooperation in these developments that requires less energy, less computational capacity, but it requires a lot of data, and the data that we already have, and we can work on that. And I think that nobody controlled my time, so I don't know how long I stayed here. So thank you. Thank you, Minister, for the complete overview and the concrete overview. And I'm really glad to see references to open standards and public interest. And one thing that it's not usually put in the pile that are the people, the necessity to qualify a class to dominate the AI systems and not to be dominated by it. So it's very good to start our discussion. Now I will give the floor to the head of the Argentine Agency of Data Protection, Beatriz Gianchorena, who is also the president of the committee of the 108 Convention. In this capacity, I would like to ask you, what is the role or the potential of this instrument to create more trust in cooperation and a common language among the countries in terms of data protection? Please. Thank you very much, Nicolo and Luca. First, I would like to say that it is a pleasure to be in this great country, in this beautiful city of Rio de Janeiro. And obviously, in Getulio Vargas Foundation, that I believe that you cooperate a lot with the generation of knowledge in these topics that are so difficult to approach because it involves a lot of different fields of knowledge. So thank you, Nicolos and Luca. And firstly, I'm going to put here my head of the Commission of Data Protection of the 108 Convention, and in the end, I will speak as an Argentine authority. Firstly, I would like to say that the convention is the only legally binding instrument that is multilateral and legally binding in the field of data protection. And the authorities, and this is very useful, to think globally in order to act locally, how to join international standards with issues like local enforcement. This is one of our tasks. Today, the 108 Convention has 55 countries. There is a modernized version called 108 Plus, and this 108 Plus, in order to enter in force, it requires 38 rectifications. We have 34 of them. Argentina was the 23rd country to rectify it, and it helped us in terms of rules. Even though it didn't enter in force yet, that boosted us to have initiative of bills of law to update the law in Argentina. We have a law that is 25 years old and other instruments or other regulations that we were updating from the agency. So clearly, it is an encouragement for the countries to have better regulations. And these regulations can connect to international standards and international norms. I can also say that Brazil, as Ecuador and Philippines, these are three countries that today are observers, but they manifested their intentions and their willingness to adhere to this convention. And once this 108 plus enters in force, they can join, and we hope to build more than 55 countries from different continents. We can summarize that the member states can guarantee a legal base for the mutual existence and cooperation among the private and public sectors in a more stable condition for these flows through the borders. Another key issue for us to think about the necessity of international cooperation as the 108 Convention is the geopolitics, where we are right now, and what are the instruments that we have to govern technologies in favor of democratic societies. That is the big question that we ask. And I think that the convention contributes to the construction of the trust, the building of trust. I also always say that trust is one of the invisible institutions of democracy. And this construction of trust is a key issue. Capacities and trust, and far beyond what is called the Brussels effect. When I talk about the European Council, everybody talks about these strong European roots, but think about these 55 countries. There are Latin American countries, African countries, a lot of Asian observers, and most of European countries. Of course, this has influence in the Ibero-American network. The standards there are expected in this 108 plus convention, and the contractual clauses of the Ibero-American network, that is the model, connect to these clauses of the convention. And I'm going to refer to these data flows. That is one of the main advantages that this convention brings from the Article 14th, that has huge work that we are developing in order to map the existing data flow regimes in the world to generate the inventory of all the existing tools around the data flows and the safe data flows with trust through the frontiers. And the other two things, one has to do with the international cooperation, that I believe that there is a clear legal base in the convention where the authorities can cooperate in research and other tangible issues for the enforcement of the protection of personal data. And the other one is the interinstitutional cooperation. We have a strong work with the European Committee of Data Protection, in which we participate in many different activities with the European data supervisors, the Global Privacy Assembly. We participate in the G7 event that we worked with children and adolescents, and I believe that the work of the convention, or of the committee, I'm sorry, to bring concrete instruments and material instruments for the authorities of different countries of data protection, maintaining a legal base of international cooperation. And in this complex geopolitical world, I believe it is a good solution to bring together these common grounds in terms of data protection, because more than ever, the authorities are local, but the data and the flows are global. Now, putting my hat as Global South, more than Argentina, I'm going to the whole Global South. With the presentation of the minister, I would like to say that the challenge of sovereignty of infrastructure is really important. And I would say three things about this. First, I would associate sovereignty with autonomy. These are similar concepts and we work on them in tune. And I think that the autonomy of the data protection authorities is a value to build sovereignty. And I think that the capacity of the state is also the best tool to build sovereignty. And when I talk about the state capacity, it's not only the institutional capacity, but the economic capacity, and the infrastructure is part of the state's infrastructure, if it is a public infrastructure. And the challenge to lead a development strategy, this is the most important one. And the public investment is part of this development strategy. And I think that the third part, in order for this to have a confluence, has to do with social contracts that protect this construction of capacity and public infrastructure for the technological and digital challenges. So I'll close here and I'll give back the floor to Nicolo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. Two of the main points that you mentioned, I was really pleased with it, because we do not need to reinvent the wheel. It's something that already exists. And so for 45 years now, so this is something that favors international cooperation, and I'd also like to reinforce that industrial policies and investments are necessary as a form of regulation. And many of the times I'm asked, why do I want to work with industrial policies and regulation? Because it is a way to actually make regulation through facilitation and not sanctions. And Norberto Bob would write that 50 years ago already. So you regulate by sanctioning or also by the creation of processes. It's just like the Chinese and North Americans have already done for the past 60 years. So really liked your point. And I think this is a good kickstart to pass the floor to Gustavo Baja, because in the past few years in Mexico, there was a certain institutional revolution in terms of data regulation, and NIVE or InfoM is also a different dynamic in the sense of having personal data and digital infrastructure, public infrastructure. And so, what are the challenges and opportunities currently in Mexico? Thank you so much for this invitation to be here, Nicolo, and Luca. It is a pleasure to be here. So, the reality in Mexico, for those that see this transformation in this aspect for the past few years, there are many different institutional reforms taking place in 2024 and 25, with the goal to overcome this dichotomy between state control and market opening, and that has been transforming as well in this administration. Our president, Sheinbaum, has created the Agency for Telecommunication and Digital Communication. So we have the responsibility to build this whole interoperable public database and national policies for telecommunication by simplifying some procedures. And obviously, it has its advantages, but a few concerns. The advantages would actually be to, accelerate digital transformation. But in terms of data protection, that is very concerning, especially when when we need to have data security, and the success of that operation relies on different countermeasures to make sure that our citizens will have their data protected. In the case of the authority that's responsible for controlling personal data in a federal level, that is a role for the anti-corruption secretariat. And we also have this department for personal data protection and privacy. And before we had INAI that had that autonomous responsibility. But in this case, the access to information is under the responsibility of another department. And I think it's important to show that we have an authority that is concerned only and exclusively about data privacy, because for the past 20 years, the model would work with both topics, transparency and privacy, but they shared this common debate in classification, debates, and features, and now we have different logics. We need our authority that is concerned with data privacy to be exclusively concerned about that. So the biases of language models, financial, international issues in cybersecurity, and to have that possibility for data protection to not be perceived only as some sort of bureaucracy, something that is associated to other issues, but as really a standard for protection and privacy. In the artificial intelligence era, privacy must be a core value. And with this architecture and digital sovereignty are directly connected, because we are constantly discussing a regulation, we do not still have a law or that regulates our artificial intelligence, but we do have a few initiatives, a few bills from different parties that still need to be passed. So regulation is basically taking place by sectorial norms, but the idea is not have this hyper regulation that will become obsolete later and will we have to focus on human rights as well, along with ethical indications for OECD and UNESCO. And so here basically we have these three main divisions. So infrastructure, e-commerce, and AI, they share this same umbrella. So to build national interoperability, we can see here that the source code of public platforms should be the same one. And on the free trade deal with North America that discusses e-commerce, it forbids the forced location of providers, but we do have a robust section for private data. So to maintain competitiveness in North America and different regions of the world, we need trans-border technologies that are compatible with global patterns. And I think artificial intelligence needs high quality data. If we have these data that are sort of providing data for AI that will not be viable to us, I think that true digital sovereignty does not mean to build these huge cyber walls or sort of have an anachronical view. I think it is the capacity to self-determine of a nation to tell what are their rules and laws for their cyberspace and participate in the global scenario. And that is why I think that for Mexico, the ideal model would be this triangle, would basically be a positive regulatory triangle to take into consideration different factors that are technically strong, regardless of their criteria. And the main development of our country that we still need is to get the trust of our population and the regulation of the AI markets, sandbox frameworks, and also impact assessment in fundamental rights. If Mexico is able to actually play those, all of those parts correctly, we'll be able to offer great rights to our population and consolidate this new idea of data governance that is extremely important in Latin America, just like it was mentioned by my colleagues. Thank you so much. Well, I think that's very realistic, what's happening in Mexico. And every change will always represent an opportunity and also a challenge. But we have to use those opportunities to promote cooperation with digital agencies, because that, in a way, that creates a trust among other countries. So hopefully we'll see this dynamic in other countries of Latin America. And now I'd like to invite a colleague that's from another country. Ahmad it's not the first time he's here. Last year, he presented to us the AI safety risk evaluation framework. And I'd like to understand, especially from the work that you did about cooperative sovereignty, what are the principles that you believe that are important to develop this cooperative sovereignty, and if the risk assessment should be something that is mandatorily part of this sovereignty program, whether we should have some sort of infrastructure for risk assessment. And I know that this is what we're going to talk about tomorrow, but if you could just give us a taste of that. Thank you. You have the floor.
Good time. Take the headphones on now. I'll speak in English. First of all, Nicolo, Luca, thank you very much. Thank you, FGV, for partnering with DCO on different initiatives. Thank you for inviting us here every year. This is my third consecutive year here. And we have been able to do some really meaningful stuff together. So as my friend Luca mentioned earlier, we did mainly, he authored the study, I supported him with that, on behalf of DCO to create a framework for what we call cooperative digital sovereignty. So we hijacked the concept or the framework that Luca had for digital sovereignty and added the mix of cooperation, because digital cooperation organization, we represent 16 member states and cooperation is our DNA. So thank you very much for launching that study officially today. Please read the study, give us your feedback, and we would be more than happy to discuss. Now coming to your question, Nicolo, I'll frame my answer with an interplay of digital sovereignty and resilience. And why I would do that, because a lot of our member states are interested in both these topics, and they are mixing these topics, sometimes confusing these topics. And resilience is very, very important in our part of the world where I'm coming from. So it's another continent, basically. And then we will see what is the meaningful role cooperation can play in achieving both these things. As the theme of this whole discussion, many countries, many nations are reaching for digital sovereignty, and for a very good reason. Recent shocks and deepening dependence on a handful of technology providers and countries have made the governments acutely aware of how much their digital life they do not control. But sovereignty is, as said by the Honorable Minister and many other people here, it's not owning every layer of the technology. It's not isolation. The first instinct when we talk about sovereignty and digital sovereignty is isolation. It is keeping sovereign control over rules, governance, and accountability that apply to your data and critical systems, and retaining the capacity to choose, so you are never locked into a dependency that can be turned against you. The other half of the story is resilience, as I mentioned earlier, and the disruptions are increasing. So many countries are chasing sovereignty and resilience together because the past year has shown how fragile the foundations are. In April last year, a cascading failure in Iberian Peninsula took roughly 60% of Spain's electricity demand offline. Within 5 seconds, tens of millions of people were left without power, no internet, no payments for about 10 hours. And this experts call it as a technical glitch. As early as this year, the conflict in the region where I'm coming from drew commercial data centers directly into the kinetic hostilities, while separately, GPS jamming knocked out satellite navigation for more than 1,000 ships in a single day. So technical, kinetic, geopolitical disruptions, and sometimes all at once. And here's the hard truth on those events expose. The value chain behind every digital service, compute, semiconductors, cables, cloud, energy, runs through suppliers and jurisdictions no single country controls or governs. So the instinct to wall everything actually backfires. So for example, the strict data localization with no cross-border backup is sovereignty without resilience. A single point of failure made legitimate by a statute. But a pure public cloud dependency framework is resilience without sovereignty. You keep running on infrastructure whose terms are set elsewhere. The way out of this dilemma is the meaningful cooperation, the instrument through which a country builds both resilience and real sovereignty. But cooperation only counts when it leaves you more capable and freer to choose. Cooperation that deepens single dependency does not count. Done right, sovereignty and resilience stop being a trade-off and become complements. Take Estonia's data embassy, for example. This example has become, it was set many, many years ago, but it has become relevant, very relevant in the very recent events that are happening in the region. Live copies of data that is most critical to the state, population, land registry, etc., etc. They sit in a Tier 4 facility in Luxembourg under exclusive Estonian jurisdiction. The data is on foreign soil, sovereignty over it stays home. Contrast it with Ukraine in 2022. There were very recently coined data localization rules, probably in 2021, to keep the critical state data within the country. And when tested, this confinement became a liability. So Ukraine had to change its law to permit an emergency migration of critical state registries, more than 10 petabytes of data from dozens of government bodies to a foreign hyperscaler. And so it kept the state running, but the analysts put it that it solved the vulnerability of data being unavailable to the dependence on infrastructure that is under someone else's jurisdiction. The sustainable model is or could be a cooperative one, which means that the trusted cross-border redundancy through, for example, the arrangements like data embassies without a single jurisdiction lock-in. AI makes it all harder. The stakes rise sharply because AI value chain is even more concentrated. And in a landscape that is disconcentrated, getting sovereignty wrong is very costly. And doing it alone is simply not an option. So this is what our study that we launched earlier suggests. It maps sovereignty across 12 interconnected enablers, categorized into 4 groups, as my friend Luca has mentioned earlier: data, software and AI models, compute, risk-based regulation and governance, access to capital, etc. And cooperation dimension is running across all these enablers. So the key insight is that these enablers interact with each other. Isolated fixes do not fix the problem at all. And in this framework, the risk-based governance sits alongside compute and connectivity, which is my answer to whether the risk assessment is strategic infrastructure. Yes, it is a strategic infrastructure. It is not an afterthought. So regarding the cooperation, let me tell you a bit about DCO. It exists exactly for this purpose. We are a multilateral organization whose entire purpose is a trusted cooperation, a neutral table where states can pool capacity, align rules, build shared infrastructure without surrendering the authority. We are very well positioned to turn this cooperative digital sovereignty framework into a concept that is operational and it's collective. One example is DCO interoperability mechanism for cross-border data flows. And we are trying to create, there are other examples that exist, but we are trying to create for the DCO, 16 DCO member states, a mechanism with its privacy principles, with its model contractual clauses, that when we operationalize, it lets different jurisdictions move data on trusted terms without the need to harmonize their laws. Another example is, as Nicolo said, AI ethics evaluator that I will present tomorrow. And we have a couple of other tools for AI assessment readiness that could be applied across the countries, and they are not embedded into singular laws that the countries have passed. So the cooperative digital sovereignty is what we are trying to build. The concept came now, but there are different instruments and there are different efforts that we are doing to operationalize it for the DCO member states accordingly. With this, I stop my English version and let's switch back to the original language. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. It's a more global perspective. And now from global, let's go to local. Now I'll pass the floor to the Secretary Correa, that honors us with his presence for the third time. Rodrigo is our partner and representative of the city of Rio that has an ambitious view of digital transformation in the infrastructure or in the data regulation. We would like to understand how the government of Rio de Janeiro is seeing these challenges and what are the solutions. Thank you, Luca, Belli, and Nicolo. Once again, the city of Rio is present in this panel. It's an honor. I would like to greet our partner, Esther Dweck, partner of the city of Rio in these digital initiatives. It is really curious because Rio has this vocation of global city. It is global and it's also local because the city is the public entity that is closest to the citizen. And by being closer to the citizen, it is a public entity that has a high degree of interaction with the daily routine of people. And that implies an obligation of data governance that is really intense, really permanent, and really perfected. Aligned with this global city, we released the Rio AI City. And this is exactly to attract technologies, to attract data center processors, to attract options of energy in order to have a local data processing. And the idea here is not a predatory data processing. It is a processing that use our resources and extract the technology from here. The idea is to be able to bring the technology companies to the city, but to contribute to reduce the degree of independence and to increase our digital sovereignty. This is the idea when we propose that Rio can be the capital of artificial intelligence globally. Whereas our local initiatives, there are some points here. I think that we have to observe some parameters. One of them is the standardization and the interoperability. This is a topic of our meeting, and we have been talking about interoperability since yesterday. And the minister talked about the initiatives as gov.br and digital identity. Nationally, they bring this integration among different entities. But we would only have a digital federalism when the entities have interoperability among themselves and the local entities have more necessity. And I'm talking about the second largest capital of the country with a reasonable budget. But the challenge is that Brazil will reach inaccessible entities. As the minister said, the efforts of the federal government is that it has a big inclusion of digital inclusion. Digital sovereignty is not done alone. It is done with the inclusion of everyone, not leaving anyone behind, because the citizen that is in the end and the citizen that needs the service, this is our recipient, this is our beneficiary. Besides that, we had other successful initiatives. That was the creation of a proposition of technological innovations to receive these solutions of society in order to implement in the city of Rio. Not so long ago, we released the bidding notices for sandbox solutions. We need the government to experiment and to make them effective, to know if these solutions can contribute to better services. And lastly, in our challenge of governance, we established in 2024 a municipal program of data protection, and this municipal program establishes some rules of risk management, of governance, and joint controllership of data. We are the second largest city in the capital in the country, and that means that we treat personal data of health, education, transportation, and we are really present in the life of the citizens. And that implies a responsibility to manage this data, that if we don't have the proper governance, we would put this data at risk and we use the data only as a repository. And personal data is an important asset that increases the capacity of the state. Data is an important asset that perfects the public policies. If we do not face the data that we have only as a repository, we won't evolve as much. And establishing a governance program, a program that involves awareness and permanent training and collaboration, and that allows the integration among the municipal bodies and the collaboration with other entities, we would lose a lot in this process to reach and contribute to digital sovereignty programs. And to conclude, regarding innovation, I think we can only have innovation with the effective transparency and the observance and respect of the rights to information. These are not limits. They are limits, but they are not obstacles to innovation and technological innovation. If we do not have that as a privacy by default and privacy by design, if we do not have as parameter, it's very unlikely to have a good public policy. The good public policy is done from the detection that the rights should be respected since its origin, since the design of the public policy. And the city of Rio, that intends to be global, has to look at the fundamental rights and have them as a parameter. This has to be our direction. The interoperability is the main backbone, and we want to have the national authorities, the national policy of data protection that includes the subnational entities, but we need to have the cities included in this process of reaching digital sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I feel honored, not only for living here in Rio, but to be able to witness the advancements of the initiatives that the municipality has been doing, both in participative governance in the sandbox, as the Committee for Data Protection that not only guarantees the protection of fundamental rights, but also creates a new culture for data protection. And I can see that by the participation of the Center of Technology that you have in the committee. Now, you have touched on a point about data centers as tools for digital sovereignty. And I'd like to connect that with another panelist, that is Alessandro Lombardi. He's the CEO of LE Data Center. And I'd like to ask you, Alessandro, how this physical infrastructure connects with the public infrastructure, digital infrastructure, especially with the advancements of cloud computing and artificial intelligence, and also regional conversations that are being held. What is your opinion on those discussions? Good afternoon, good night, good evening, excuse me. Yes, so we are the first Brazilian company of data centers, and we have our units in different 6 states. We started a few years ago, and now 80% of the data center infrastructure is located in São Paulo, but we also have the states of Pará, Rio Grande do Sul, and so we have a very broad presence in Brazil, and most of our clients are public entities and also universities that can have access to that infrastructure. And we still need a faster computing capacity to be able to provide to all of that demand. We also have core that that are pretty much the camera system that police uses to see the city of Rio de Janeiro. So I understand that the sovereignty of a country really passes by the capacity to store and compute data inside the country. And the reality is that 60% of Brazilian data are not stored in Brazil. Most of them are in North Virginia in the US because they had a good infrastructure to host all of our data. Now, our president Lula was able to have this regulatory framework that was able to actually organize the access to data centers. And that was done in 2025. And our Ministry of Revenue, he has also worked on a tax framework that was approved by President Lula as well. And we know that this is taking a little more time, but big democracies have need more time for discussion. Our dear Minister Stair is doing a very important work to actually encourage American companies to have their own data centers here in Brazil. And that is something that's starting to take place. And because of this policies, and we still have Dominic, that is very relevant for the Brazilian policies in terms of digital matters. In Latin America, so Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Chile have 0.1% of AI chips installed here. And why is that? Because we lacked policies for protection for that technology for Latin America. And I understand that Brazil is one of the big players of this change, is one of the catalyzers. And I agree 100% with you, Luca, and the work of FGV that this needs to be regulated in an industry without having actual rules. The AI law has been discussed in Congress for over 2 years now, but I would like to mention an important thing that is our experience with the city of Rio de Janeiro and how important it is to plan infrastructure in the urban context. That's something that is basically new, and I think Mexico is considering doing something similar. And in Italy, we study the big cities, and Rome was able to dominate the whole continent for centuries from their capacities to actually cultivate, right? So they had grains, they had a good soil that eventually became a great economic power of the whole continent in the Western world back then. Cities like Venice, and they had a huge, a great trade capacity because of their geographical location of their ports. And Eduardo Paes shared with us, the former mayor of Rio, he used to say that the city of the future is a city that has the capacity to to generate its own energy, to actually compute its own data. And just like Rome had the capacity to plant, and it's basically Rio de Janeiro is a huge, a very important area for energy generation, not only because of oil and gas, but because in the 70s and 80s, there was this huge unified network that started here, and it was designed to have Rio de Janeiro as the central area. So nuclear energy of Angra dos Reis is here in Rio de Janeiro. Hydropower, we also have huge hydropower mills that arrive here in Rio de Janeiro. So it's basically the center of Brazilian energy. And we have an excess of energy. So the question is, why won't Rio de Janeiro become a city that is able to compute its own data? And then that's where we have this DIC project. We started working on it about 4 years ago. And from then, we had Porto Maravilha, many other startups, Rio Innovation Week, ICT summits, web summits, so many other initiatives, and European and Chinese companies looking at Rio as the capital of the future, because we will be able to have a computing capacity that will be the leader for the next 100 years. And so basically, when the federal government and the local government support different projects, São Paulo has other companies, and Ceará, we're not the only ones that are being supported, but to be able to innovate on that. So that's it. Thank you so much. Well, okay, so let's have a more regional view with Pablo Bello. I think we know each other for almost 15 years. Pablo now has a leading role in the LatAm area on digital transformation. He's the head of digital transformation in the Latin American Development Bank. And we were discussing that today. What are the challenges that we're facing? We need to be realistic. What are our obstacles that we're about to face? Good afternoon. I'm going to speak in Spanish, so it's easier. But possibly I'll speak a little Portuguese, but I'd like to thank you for the invitation to be here. It has been an extraordinary event. The presentation of Minister Stair was something remarkable, and that shows that Brazil and the minister particularly are world level class, right? So our minister here is like our Messi. So maybe our Pelé. And I'd like to start by saying that this debate is so important. President Lula said that the time is now. We are in the era of artificial intelligence, digital transformation, and this agenda is urgent. We cannot lose that window of opportunity in Latin America, and I would like to incorporate in that reflection that has geopolitical elements of how Latin America is in the world. But I'd also like to mention the economics of it, and that passes by the moment that we're living right now. Latin America is in its 20 years of slow productivity. We're growing much less than the rest of the world. We are left behind on many different areas, and so we also have growing taxing pressure also because we have lower population growth. And so the digital transformation is something that we urgently need to discuss. We're talking about the effective possibility to offer the citizens of Latin America and the Caribbean a better perspective for the future. So digital sovereignty has not only a political view, but also an economic one. We need to offer protection for services to provide good answers for problems from the future. So whenever we will have different references, just like you said, 60% of the Brazilian data is operated outside of Brazil. So that is something that it is a real risk. Distance is a risk, but the difficulty to offer solutions more quickly, it is also a risk. We have services that are slower because of distance. So in that context, from that perspective, there are many discussions involved about these economic issues, but particularly I'd mention a few of them, and we need to reinforce on those points from a regional perspective and with strategic cooperation. So let's have that as an ambition, really, infrastructure for computing services. So 84% of the population in Latin America has access to internet, but 20% still has no access or very bad access to internet and connection to internet. And the indexes of connectivity have grown in Latin America, but we need to have a significant amount of access for our users, for our citizens, but with an appropriate technology and appropriate speed for AI. It's not enough just to have AI. So uh, I have to know how to use it, and that demands talent and capacity building. So it's a group of elements that go way beyond technological solutions. Naturally, the topic of data processing connects with cybersecurity, and you guys have explained that very well. But out of this perspective that was mentioned, this sexy concept of the moment, that's GPI, here I believe that we still have a good space, enough room for finding new solutions. And uh, when I was referring to Minister Ser, Brazil is a world-class country, and we have other cases in Latin America as well, but we still have a huge challenge to share all of that knowledge with other countries. We don't have to look only at, for example, Estonia or what's taking place in Europe, the US, and Japan. We have here in Latin America, top of the line concept, and we're dialoguing with the Ministry of Innovation and also with the federal government to find support for those solutions to be developed here. And CAFI, that is in the development bank, we have this fundamental role to support projects of investment in infrastructure, both physical and digital, and in finding solutions for developing intervention models. But we also have a very important role here that is of technical cooperation to support uh, um, the knowledge to be spread and focus on specific areas. And something that is very important here is that to have that capacity to cooperate and coordinate among each other. So especially when we're talking about sharing experiences, we have here the Vice Minister of Dominican Republic. They're doing a wonderful work with DPI, and so I think we have remarkable cases in Latin America that need to be well known all over the world. But we also need to understand how to build solutions that are collaborative and that allow us to move quicker. And I believe that we all share that idea of sovereignty, and not that traditional concept of sovereignty. When we're talking about the isolation of state and nation, we see that sovereignty is a shared concept. For example, here in Latin America and the Caribbean, that seems fundamental to me. So how to have instruments and technological solutions that will help that shared sovereignty model, and that's essential. And what we can do is to build financial tools to support that model and foster collaborative models and payment systems like PIX that are interoperable in our region, or maybe other solutions for cybersecurity deals and agreements. And we also have this thing of connectivity through the Amazon, and Brazil has been working on that. But when we're talking about Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, that should always receive some attention. So in terms of infrastructure and services, they're also relevant. But we can also consider how this technology can favor shared sovereignty, because when we're talking about that, we need to gain trust. And unfortunately, there is a lot of mistrust in Latin America. And so we might establish models, computing models that are like mesh, where we would have that capacity to, from different countries with small infrastructures that operate in an integrated way, and that might actually help sensitive data to remain in their countries. And also, there's this great idea about digital embassies. So, data from citizens that are sensitive might be in another country from a perspective of like an embassy. So, they're physically in our country, but legally in another country. So, we might think of solutions like that that will favor regional integration. And we have really a task that we're all responsible for, to understand how these spaces for dialogue are consistent and coherent. Brazil is the president of ILAC, and I think that's a wonderful opportunity to make advancements in that agenda that will only not only be discussed, but actually put into action. And so the development is important to contribute with the growth of these plans. And we're launching a forum with the topic for artificial intelligence, and that goes along with ILAC, and we know that Brazil has an important role in the establishment of AI committees and DPI as well. So this demands a certain effort from us, and we must facilitate that consolidation and coordination. And just to finish, we are also supporting and trying to set a sort of a shared roadmap on AI to broaden goals for Latin America for the next 5 years and establish financing mechanisms. And this combination of dialogue with new tools is exactly where CAF can make a difference with. Because we are the only development bank in Latin America for Latin America, without other global players involved that have their own agenda that not necessarily converge to ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. It's really interesting, and I'm really optimistic with all these initiatives that promised scalability in a more sovereignty, operational sovereignty that was mentioned by the minister in her presentation. It's not only about technological sovereignty. We need to coordinate the efforts to have an operational sovereignty and to be able to apply the laws and the policies, because if it's done individually, it can be more difficult, especially for smaller countries. It's not the case of Brazil, of course. But now, talking about the union that makes the strength in the regional, I will pass the floor to our last speaker, who has a strong experience acting in the region. And she's part of the TTG forum that analyzed the intersection between geopolitics, trades, and technology. And it's interesting to hear your perspective, Carolina, about the geopolitical and trade dynamics and commercial dynamics and how they are changing the digital policies in Latin America, and especially considering your experience of some years with civil society. If civil society is adapting enough, quickly enough to these dynamics, and where do you see the best opportunities besides the challenges? All of that in 5 minutes, please. Well, being the last to speak, I want to thank you for the invitation, and thank you everyone who are sticking here. Of course, you are hungry and close to the dinner time. But one of the main important things in terms of trade is the way that in only 2 years it changed a framework that the trade agreements uh, happens. The trade agreements usually design policies of international trade. What is clear in the last 2 years is that it's not only about the rules of the trade, but the digital policy as a whole. And this is being developed and designed. And let's say Trump, not because he made a 180 turn in the policies in the United States, but because he left it very clear. He said, this is going to be that way. And nowadays, especially for Latin America, the, the policy related to United States is a policy in which we combine trade, geopolitics, and trade used as a weapon. Besides having a geopolitics with two hubs, the United States and China. And that generates a huge pressure on the way that we see the traditional elements of trade as it was discussed here. So I'm not going to repeat. But how it's going to be managed, the artificial intelligence. To us, it is clear that the effect of that is a reduction of the political decision space locally. And before it could be ethereal, now it is materializing as the lattice decision. And this is really clear that there is no legal certainty and legal security on how the digital policies are developed domestically. And even if we have an attention to how a country acts in related to the other countries in their internal priorities, for example, uh, issues like industrial policy and economic development. But outside, this can be imposed through agendas that are external, and there will develop new dependencies. In this framework, what I think it is important is that we need to realize that there is a reduction of these political issues, and this can generate an effect that allows to reduce the pressures. We discussed that in other panels, but what you said that the digital sovereignty is not just about trends and it's not that I'm going to face the world, and this goes against the difficulty of the weapon pressures of the small countries. And we see a little hope when Canada says that we are going to make this connection with the middle powers, and this has no content whatsoever. And I believe that countries like Brazil have this power. But how is this power going to be used? What are you going to do with that? It's important because we hope that you will realize that the capacity of political independence is reducing and you can act in an international way to help the interest of the region, generating an effect of collaboration. And if this is a foreign policy, but it's individual, this is my hope. I was saying today that I have this dream. But in fact, this is not what is happening. The agreements that are being signed without the United States are basically a copy and paste. The same rules are applied. And this is done with Mercosur and Europe. And this is done in large scale. And I do believe that there is a necessity of creativity. And I don't believe that this creativity will come from the usual suspects. Because sometimes if they are written to benefit the American industrial policy, there is no interest in the local industrial policy. The governments are worried with other dimensions, and clearly they are not seeing the creativity. And our call in the forum is to bring these new stakeholders and to make them sit down at the same table with the academia and the civil society in order to think creatively on how the what are the norms that we need to have in this new context in our own benefits of our local national policies. And they are not the policies that are in the agreements. And we have to try as much as possible. If something changes, we need a different relationship. But the challenge is not that it's not going to be easy, it's going to be difficult, and we are going to continue receiving pressure. And in terms of the civil society, we have many challenges that allow us to participate in the process. And secondly, how we are developing the digital policy. The civil society is divided. We have organizations of digital rights that think about the concerns of freedom of speech and privacy, etc. And from the other side, people who study trade. And these are people who talk about the markets and the economic policy and etc. And maybe to be creative to face this challenge, we are going to have to match these experiences to offer another point of view for the government. If the governments want to listen to this new context, that sometimes they are confidential negotiations, obscure negotiations. If you look at this debate in Mexico today, that our friend mentioned here, our friend from Mexico mentioned, what is appearing to the public is commercial about automobiles and investments. Nobody talked about AI. It's impossible to think that we are not talking about AI in these agreements. And this is not the agreements that is going to determine the way that United States are imagining this regulation in the next few years. But we are not discussing that. And therefore, sectors as the academia and civil society cannot contribute to that. And I believe, and I'll think of many different things, but I'll stop here. Okay, let's be optimistic, however pragmatic and realistic. As a prize for those who could be with us until 6:30, we still have 10 minutes, so we are still in schedule, but we started 10 minutes late, so you have 15 minutes for your questions. I'm certain, I'm sure that there are some energetic participants who are really willing to share your comments and questions. So you just need to raise your hand and a microphone will be taken to you. Any questions? There's a question here? Okay. Okay, don't be shy. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. My question would be to the representative of data protection in Argentina, Beatriz. Recently, we had the trade agreement with United States. And I understand that this is not considered in these discussions that we had here. But for sensitive data transfer, will there be a bigger progress in order to consider as adequacy or not? What is there in this agreement? And about the 108 convention, Argentina complied with 32 items of this checklist of out of 34. It was something like that. I don't know if this has to do with the recognition of the ACDCs from Europe. Well, I knew that I wouldn't leave here without a question about this treaty. I was already expecting that. First, the treaty is not in force yet. It is true that there are two items in this treaty that are responsibility of the agency. One has to do with adequacy, and the other has to do with the CDPR. A general comment here about the trade agreements, and a little bit with what Carolina was saying. Until now, there were no negotiations in this treaty about data protection. And that means that the freedom of speech as a right is not negotiated. The personal data protection is not negotiated. There is a change now in this negotiation. And this is already a reality. The countries are sovereign to sign their trade treaties, trade agreements. So it's not in force yet. But what we are going to do, as we did with all the other adequacy decisions in Argentina, it is an assessment to make our decision. But we don't have anything open about this issue yet. I understand that this is a responsibility of the Argentine Congress. This is the first point. Now, regarding the 108 Convention, the ratifications that are necessary for the modernized protocol to be enforced are 38, and we have 4 signatures left. The Argentina was the 23rd country to ratify, but we still have only 34 and not 38. This is the modernized 108 convention that has been enforced for many years. And global standards are important for the countries. Countries like ours are serviced by this convention. Uruguay is also part of this convention. Mexico are already ratified. It's ratified the 108, but not the 108 plus. But Brazil and Colombia are observers, and we hope that they can join. And regarding the adequacy decisions, and I will conclude here. Argentina has an adequacy conclusion from the European Union since 2003. It was the first country in Latin America that had this decision. And it allows us to have a free flow of data in trust with the European countries. But there are other countries that we have adequacy agreements with. And most of these countries provide sufficient guarantees. And this has to do with the fact that the protection is together with the data. Pablo said, what would be these diplomatic embassies? It's not that the legal regulation can be applied to the data that is outside of the borders. And I think this is essential, the concept of extraterritoriality that allows the data protection authorities to guarantee somehow these rights, the rights of people that comes to our territory regarding the data treatments that is done outside of the territory. And I'll conclude here. Thank you for the question. Any other questions? While you think about the questions, I have one comment here. The example of Argentina and United States right now makes us think that sovereignty is a consequence, is a democratic reflex. In our research, we highlight that the ideal is the self-determination in terms of understanding technology to build it and regulate it. But every country can have their own democratic lessons and choose governments that can have interest in privatize everything and delegate the whole system to a foreign player. This can be a democratic choice. Personally, I don't think it is sustainable. But everyone can make their own choices. Maybe that's why yesterday in the morning we were mentioning that digital sovereignty in terms of technological autonomy could be considered as a state plan and not a government plan. Not to link this type of choice that are extremely relevant for the future of a country that is not necessarily related to the choice of a government elected by a specific term, but to a long-term plan. to have some limits or guardrails that allow the development, an isolated development of the versatile moods of the governments that every 4 years or every 5 years can change. However, it is a political choice ultimately, as the data transfer between Europe and the United States is a political choice, clearly. It is a policy designed in the high level of data protection compared to the European one. It is a political choice, and this is an extremely important element that can be not as easy to digest for human rights experts. It is a geopolitical important moment. Any other questions? No? Okay, so I think you are tired. You want to go home after 2 full days of debate. But you have one more day of debates tomorrow if you are interested. Everyone is invited. Tomorrow, you are going to have a whole day dedicated to AI risks, governance, innovation. Before concluding, I would like to give the possibility of each one of the speakers to share their final remarks. Let's start with Pablo, maybe. Just very brief.
Yeah, just creativity is a key element, and creativity has to do not only with the elements that Carolina has mentioned, but how regional conversations and mechanisms of integration are established, and also from our side, how can we be creative with different financial tools that will allow us to have the policies that we have and transform that into concrete results. We can no longer continue to conceptualize and keep debating on things that will not have a concrete use in public policies and innovation. The solution is to have creativity as a key element. Yeah, I think that it's important to share our view of the future and all of the great power that we have, and this 60% of data that are in North America, they are all they run on gas, on gasoline and oil, and so that's a lot of pollution for the environment. And here we do not have that, and I believe that we have a very optimistic future because of our clean energy in terms of digital sovereignty. Yes, and I would like to talk again about cooperation as something that is necessary, is fundamental, is key. But I would not like to not mention the importance of connectivity infrastructure, something that Pablo has also mentioned, that on Monday we had an earthquake in Colombia, and we did not have such serious consequences like in Venezuela, even though the territorial extension was a lot bigger. But 2 cities in Colombia that were completely devastated in the 80s and 90s, and now we have protocols for that. We have rescue teams, so we have this whole public policy that allows us to respond quickly to those emergencies. However, we had that earthquake in the Pacific of Colombia, the Pacific island of Colombia, and it took us 2 days to actually be able to respond to that. And when we have an emergency, the problem is actually to be seen and understand the needs that they have, and that territory was completely isolated. They were able to recover quickly. because the state was able to perceive that need, but unfortunately, because of this lack of collaboration, we still have that territory to be isolated. So I would say that we do have this gap in the digital world. And the same way that we deal with energy, we must do the same with internet, with digital. It's really a call. This is a critical infrastructure for a moment like an earthquake, an event like an earthquake, for example. Yeah, I think it's important to look at the Brazilian context, and I agree when you say that Brazil has endless natural resources that might be an advantage in that in the question of AI. And I was talking to Anna Bryan because 65% of the resources of AI are in China and the US. And what we here in the global south can do about that, we must integrate to them. I think that digital sovereignty propasses by integration through Latin America so that we can become stronger and be able to have an agreement for the future of Latin America to share public digital infrastructure in open networks in Latin America. I think we have a lot more similarities, but also a lot of differences. And we have certain challenges that we face that are very similar. And we also have this huge technological dependency that we will only be able to overcome if we look at Latin America as a group, then continue on this journey alone. So that is my wish for the next 5 years, that we will be more integrated so that we can have more capacities for integration with bigger players, and so that we might have more capacities to have access to those infrastructure so that we'll be able to operate them, and the distribution of those technological resources can be more democratic. Well, I believe that we have this window of opportunities so that Latin America can participate on the rules of the game and the global architecture in terms of data protection and digital governance. I think that we have two main challenges here. The first is to overcome this debate of regulation versus innovation. That is, we have to talk about innovation and regulation so that we might have robust innovation. And the second thing has to do with the difference between the North and South, because we have double standards for the commercial world, and we must overcome that there is a compliance that works specifically for the North and another one that works differently for the South. And so it's important to participate in the global area. And basically, our citizens must have the same rights regardless of where they live or where they come from. And that is a huge challenge. And that is why we are betting on a global agreement that will allow us to make greater advancements faster, to close those gaps between the North and the South.
Yeah. So the message is to use carefully selected cooperation as a means to achieving both digital sovereignty and resilience at the same time. And I would call all of you to visit our website, dco.org. We have a policy publication which is released every quarter. It's called DCO Policy Watch. The report is there as well. And this DCO Policy Watch, we go in detail of what are the policy discussions that are being shaped on resilience, on cross-border data flows, on privacy, on cooperation, on sovereignty. So please go through them, and we would really look forward to have some constructive feedback on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I believe that the mechanism that can work in terms of regulatory interoperability could be perhaps an important topic for discussion, so that we will not have a complex bureaucracy. So basically a common framework like data free flow and other initiatives of OECD, with the norms that have been mentioned before of the 108 plus convention and the Ibero-American convention, that should also be a common framework, because obviously protected data, whether it is from Chile, Brazil, or Argentina, they can circle around without any unnecessary barriers. And that will balance our strategic economy with economic development. For Latin America, it would be important to negotiate with large nations, showing that sovereignty is not about isolation, and perhaps that cooperation, international cooperation, and perhaps in a few years that will be something very successful. And those dates, perhaps a startup in Rio de Janeiro and Bogota might actually train artificial intelligence models for a cloud structure of our region with privacy rules that will be unique and common for every Latin American country and citizen, that they might have, our citizens might have protection and privacy without the need to concern where their data is being actually shared. And we will be able to become a sovereign community for digital, for the digital world. Thank you. Well, I would like to share my remarks, but I'm going to try to be brief, even though I am very, very excited with everything that we have heard. And that is our role, really, to plant those seeds and to do networking as well, and hope for future cooperation. So hopefully we'll meet again in the future. And I'd like to thank you all for being here. My dear colleague, Professor Luca, that was the big organizer of this event. I'd also like to thank FGV that helped us. So Victoria, Julia, João Gabriel, Yasmin, and as it was mentioned before, this is not over yet, but so for those that have survived, we'll have another round of debates tomorrow. So thank you all so much.